Hello, this is Julie Ann and Life with Collective Purpose. And today I have Nancy Gordon, who is a transformational grief expert. And as you know, that is a subject very, very close and near to my heart. And so Nancy is an international best-selling author. She is a speaker and a transformational, life-changing expert. And she knows firsthand what it's like to deal with serious loss and grief. After a life-changing car crash, it was Nancy's personal experience from hurting to healing and transforming her loss into love and grief into growth that led her to dedicating her life to helping others to do the same. She offers a very unique clinical and personal perspective on navigating all loss and grief, and she specializes in pet loss grief. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified life coach, and she combines her personal experience of fibromyalgia and a mild traumatic brain injury with her professional expertise to help people on all elements of loss and grief. It is Nancy's mission to make a difference in the world about how grief is perceived and understood and experienced and supported. And as you all know, that is something that I have recently been going through myself. And so I'm delighted to have this conversation with Nancy. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Julianne. I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
We just had the most fascinating conversation, and you are very dear to me because as you mentioned to me, when you go through a grief journey, one of the things that is very frustrating is when you look at the support and help that's out there, and there seems to be a very stringent and hard-lined approach to the 7 levels of grief, which seems to end at the acceptance stage. And I think you and I are both in agreement that, grief can be a very different journey, and it can be one that can be extremely transformational. And so it's wonderful to hear that you're bringing this to the world, and you're actually helping people to understand that the grief journey can actually be very transformational. And people know that the recent grief journey I went through was definitely transformational for me. And it did lead, in fact, to this podcast that you're now talking on right now, which is talking about collective purpose. And for you, I can see after our conversation that your purpose is very much helping people repurpose grief to be transformational. So thank you for doing that. It's wonderful, wonderful.
My life calling.
It certainly is. Now, you have managed to bring this down to 7 practices for grief. So in this interview, we're going to talk about those 7 practices, and just so that people understand a different way to look at grief. So first of all, your first step, please tell us, Nancy.
The first step is called surrender without giving up. There is a very big difference between surrendering and giving up. And I discovered that initially in my own journey after a devastating car accident. And when I finally came to terms that I had to quit my business, it was very devastating. And I thought that I was surrendering. But after I closed my practice, I realized as I did my own work in that journey of loss and grief, that I actually had given up. I hadn't surrendered. So I began a journey learning what surrendering really is about and how you identify it. And I experienced surrender with both my parents' deaths And with my two service dogs, who I lifted up, as I call, instead of putting down, within 9 months of each other. And I had a very different journey about surrendering between the two of them. And they taught me so much more about the deepest, richest parts of surrendering. That's practice one.
And you know, the interesting thing, and we were talking about this, is, you know, when we talk about grief and loss, you know, grief and loss comes to us in so many different ways. And so what we're talking about here is any kind of grief or loss. And that, as you say, that can be the loss of a close dear one to us, you know, such as your parents or such as my fiance. It can also be a pet loss, because, you know, the pets often become, you know, our very closest allies and soulmates. And it can also be the loss of your normal life, you know, because of a disability, you know, through a car accident, or a disability that has suddenly unexpectedly changed your life. So it's loss of the life that you had before. And all of those elements, it's important to talk about surrender first. So I completely identify with what you're saying. Absolutely. It took me a while to let go of my fiance. And I remember a particular day where I had what I would refer to as a screaming tantrum in the house, you know, where, you know, I had to shout and scream, you know, why, you know, why did this happen? And until I got to the point where I could just surrender and say, you know, I surrender. It's happened. Like, I need to move on. So I totally understand. So what's the next stage, or is that what's the next practice for grief?
This practice is called, good grief. About really understanding what grief is, the gifts of grief, and that when you go through your grief journey, there are stages that you experience. Kubler-Ross identified 5 stages. I have added 2 stages to that whole grief journey, my own clinical experience and practice, and experience my own journey. So I've added 2 of those. And the first is anticipatory grief. And the last stage I added is transformational grief, which is, you know, what you've been speaking about and what the purpose of this podcast is about. It's like how we can use our loss, use our journey through grief to help us grow, to help us make different decisions through life that make a difference of how we live in the world and how we relate to ourselves and to others.
Yes. It's, I mean, it's so interesting, people's perception of grief. And I know certainly myself that I had a lot of comments, you know, that people saw my grief journey, you know, as a good grief experience, you know, that I was definitely, I had a big presence on social media, you know, for people to witness my grief journey. And, you know, and now only 5 months later, you know, I'm being congratulated on my, you know, my new transformational journey, the new podcast show, and my new soulmate partner that I now have. So, you know, not many people after 5 months of grief are actually, you know, that far along on their grief journey. So,
yes.
Oh, so what is the next? What's step 3, or what is the third practice in your grief practice?
I call it mindful perception, because mindset, which is about how we talk to ourselves, how we think, and how we approach things in life, is really affected by how you think, how you talk to yourself. And so your experience can be healed or traumatic based on how you perceive everything.
Wow. And that's, how true is that? Yeah, the perception is everything. You know, if you stay in your grief, and you know, you can make that choice really of, you know, poor me. You know, like you say, when you went through a very traumatic car accident, and you know, there are many people that just go into that place of, you know, poor me. Or you can look at it in with a completely different mindset, and have a totally different result. So you know, I think that's that you have the personal experience of that to be able to share. That puts you in a very different position. So that's awesome.
Yes, I call it a life-defining moment, my car
Yes.
accident, other kind of markers like that when you go through a traumatic event or a loss. They're life-defining, but how they define you is up to you. Perception comes in. That's where the grief work comes in. That's what can make it transform from a loss to.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and the fourth practice
is called the gilted cage. So in the grief journey, there is often, whether you've lost a person, whether you've lost a pet, whether you've lost your health, there is very often, more than not, an experience of guilt and regret. And it's such an important piece of healing grief, because grief puts a lock on your heart. And within that lock is grief and lack of forgiveness and shame. All of those pieces are in that gilted cage.
Yes, I can certainly say that I went through that myself. I you know, felt guilty that I couldn't have done better to have been more supportive of Azuka in the hospital, you know, that I could have been a better health advocate for him. You know, I felt then I felt shame because I was getting on with my life, you know, rather than being the you know, the wailing widow that everybody expects me to be. So yes.
Absolutely. Those are all triggers for feeling guilt. And again, how you perceive and approach that feeling makes all the difference in your experience. And had you not, you must have done some work around that guilt, because you were able to move on.
Yes.
So that's, you know, that's the golden piece. That's the golden, that gilted cage.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the fifth practice
is called Let Love Lead. So along with simplifying your life and good self-care, a very important piece of healing is learning to love yourself, learning to forgive yourself, to having a practice of self-compassion. I was very much of a type A go-getter person before my car accident. And so it was very hard for me. I lived in that guilted cage and in that unforgiving, self-judgmental place for many more years than I wish to admit, though now I take the shortcut. But back then, it was very hard for me to practice that self-compassion. And it's so important to have that self-compassion when you're going through trauma, when you're going through loss and grief. That is sort of the underpinning of resilience.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You know, I think that you know, if you don't take that time, I think you could never really move on. I mean, I know from my own personal experience that I had to, you know, I felt very guilty about my business. because I felt guilty about taking the time to just grieve, to give myself self-love, to give myself, if I wanted to stay in bed and cry all day, that's okay. If I wanted to go and stare at the waves on the beach for the whole day, that's okay. That self-love piece is so important because it's so easy to feel guilty that you need to get back into life, in the normal flow, in the normal way. So yeah, self-love is, I would say it's one of the most important pieces, because if you can't do that, then you're just going to stay in that page, in that place, in that cage for a long time.
And the effects, the ripple effects of that, not healing your grief and not practicing all those self-care, self-love, self-forgiveness, self-compassion pieces, is that it affects how you live the rest of your life, how you actually are in relationships to others, not just to yourself, but it affects everything.
Yes.
And that's, I think, that's a part of trauma, of grief, that when it is unhealed, it does put a lock on your heart. And really, it's so sad, because what we're here for, I believe, is what dogs teach us, which is unconditional love. And what my dogs taught me in my process, my whole journey with them before and after they passed, was about practicing my own self-love, which they taught me because they loved me unconditionally.
Yes. Wow. I know I could talk a lot about that topic, because I realized that I had completely caged my heart. I had one session, which was an energetic healing session with somebody, and they identified that I had literally locked my heart, like it was locked away. I was not giving anyone love. It was just like nobody could ever have access to my heart ever again. And just, yeah, actually just recognizing that and then releasing it so that I could actually love again. That was a huge piece, a really big piece.
It is a very huge piece, and well said, because when you have a lock on your heart, not only can you not love others, but you can't allow love in.
Yes.
And that spells lonely, depressed, sad, addictions, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Okay. So number 6.
6 is entitled Just Do It Differently. What my 3-legged dog Pink taught me when she had her leg amputated. I watched her figure out what she used to do and how to do it differently. And it was an amazing story. And I wrote a children's book called Pink, the 3-legged dog who lost her leg and found her courage. Because she is probably one of the biggest mentors that I had while I was going through my own recovery and resilience, who modeled to me how you can reinvent yourself, how you can just do it differently. And in my case, just doing it differently actually became a whole new path of helping people that I wouldn't have been on had I not had that car accident and all that followed.
Yes. Yes. And that's part of the transformational piece as well. Recognizing that you have all that reflective time to be able to reflect and transform and do things differently, look at life differently. I certainly know that I look at life in a very different way to the way that I looked at life before. And I think that that transformational piece of looking at things differently and accepting that you now look at things differently is that's a huge piece. That's a huge piece. So what is the final practice, Nancy, in your 7 practices of grief?
It's called Secure Your Stride. So it's about never giving up. It's about believing in yourself. It's about letting go of what you thought it should look like and surrendering to what it is, and then making that a powerful transformation. It's all about, this step is all about putting all the other steps together to transforming your loss into love and your grief into growth.
Yes. And I know you mentioned joy as well before, which I think is, that's a big piece of transformational growth, is coming back to a place of joy. I mean, I know from my own experience that, when you come out that other side and you actually start looking at grief as transformational growth, that bringing joy back into your life is such an important part, and it's a beautiful balance, and it really gives meaning. It gives meaning to the whole journey of loss and grief, and it really does. I mean, it's not just about hope. It's actually about transformation. That's really what grief is all about, isn't it? Is transformation.
Absolutely. And there's a sub-chapter in this section, Secure Your Stride, that I entitled Play in the Balance and Balance in the Play. And that is about joy. It's about being able to hold both end, the grief, the sadness, the loss, with the joy and the moving forward. And it is a very, very integral piece to the first step, which is surrendering. It's really the flip side of that coin of surrendering, because without being able to surrender, you really can't feel joy. When you think about laughing, which is an expression of joy, you can't really laugh without letting go.
Yes.
Letting go in your body, your breath, your facial expressions. It's all about letting go. So all of these practices are very intertwined and kind of interdependent, and they all have repeat buttons. I'm sorry to say, but that is the truth.
Yes.
Once you learn, for me, what the gift of my journey was that brought me such hope and really motivated me to help others understand these 7 practices, is that when you practice all of this, you really experience life differently and yourself differently. And there's it's really a very profound experience to understand that when you practice these practices and really incorporate them, they bring you to a place you've never been.
Yes. Yes. I have to completely agree with you, because it's completely life changing. And I think that, I think of the way that I look at everything, my whole life, my purpose, everything now. Personally for me, it was a very spiritual experience of moving from, understanding that we are human beings having a spiritual experience, to actually recognizing that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that, a death is a eternal, that the soul, it is just it's just a physical death of a physical body, but the soul never dies. And for me, there was a huge shift in perception and the way that I see life and see the world, and I think that was certainly well, it was completely life-changing for me. It's completely and totally changed my whole life. And so I think of that as a very positive thing. And so that's why I love what you're doing, Nancy, because you are helping people to understand that grief is transformational, that it does not have to end at surrender. It does not have to, end at acceptance. That it's actually the beginning of a brand new way of looking at life. And so I'm really happy to see that you are one of the few that are, taking this torch and you're really helping people to look at grief in another way.
Yes, it's kind of my way of making lemonade out of lemons. It's all, yes, again, part of that mindful perception. I have a subchapter called "See the Glass Half Full and Full," and that was something my mother taught me, and I also learned through my dogs, especially Pink, that when you can see the glass half full and find the gifts, no matter what, in a loss, in a trauma, and there are gifts. And I don't mean to devalue or minimize the trauma or the loss, but when you can see the other half of that glass full and you're grateful for that, it's sort of another pathway to help you change your life.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So for those that would like to find out more about Nancy, you can go to her website, which is nancygordonglobal.com. That is nancygordonglobal.com. And you can find out more about her.
Can you also add the link tree, because I have more, it's better representation for me right now. The link is on that email.
Okay. You can also find out more about Nancy at Linktree, which is https://linktr.ee/Nancy Gordon Global. That's Linktree/Nancy Gordon Global. And you have to put a little dot between the TR and the EE. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks so much. And thanks for joining us on Life with Collective Purpose. And I look forward to working with you. I know that we're going to be doing some exciting projects together in the very near future.
Thank you so much, Julianne. I'm honored to be here.